Um, so our third lecture today is about two specific blockchain systems called Bitcoin-NG and Algorand. So we study those systems because they had a profound effect on the design of later blockchain solutions. So what are Bitcoin-NG and Algorand? Bitcoin-NG is just an academic paper. It's not really a system. But it's an academic paper from a reputable lab, blockchain, where they're doing blockchain-related research, from Cornell. And the paper is called Bitcoin-NG, Scalable Blockchain Protocol. So Algorand, on the other hand, is an actual cryptocurrency, but it's also based on an academic paper, this time paper from MIT, and the paper is called Algorand Scaling Byzantine Agreements for Cryptocurrencies. And the popularity of Algorand varied across years. I mean, as it's always the case with volatile cryptocurrencies, it usually ranks among 20 most popular cryptocurrencies by the market cap. Okay, so this lecture would be structured as two separate discussions, one of Bitcoin-NG and the other one of Algorand, because the two systems have little in common apart from being blockchain. So Bitcoin-NG, what's the motivation for Bitcoin-NG and what Bitcoin-NG strive to improve? Bitcoin, we know that Bitcoin suffers from low throughput and high transaction latencies, which are governed by the block size and the average block creation time. And the block creation time cannot be lowered because of branching and what's called mining utilization. Mining utilization is the ratio of the power that went into securing the main chain. So at this opportunity, I would like to talk about again about the negative effect of branching and the related metric of mining utilization. So the illustration that we see here is, suppose you have three branches, parallel branches. In this case, the mining utilization is that all blocks here have the same difficulty, so there was no difficulty in adjustment in the middle. In this case, the mining utilization about one. So the went into the main branch is equal to 1/3 of the work that went into all the blocks, and that's the mining utilization. Why is mining utilization important? It's important because it's an indicator of how secure the system is. If there is just a single chain with no branching, then in order to launch a double spending, the attacker needs to have 51% of the mining power. If, however, 1/3 of the nodes work on one branch, 1/3 on the second branch, and 1/3 on the third branch, then the attacker only needs to have 51% of 1/3, not of the total mining power. So that's why the branching is detrimental and mining utilization is an important metric. It's for the purpose of security, of understanding the security, how much power went into securing the chain. So what's the idea behind Bitcoin-NG? The idea is that why do we need to do POW all the time for each and every block? So in Bitcoin-NG, a miner performs POW to be elected as a leader for a period of time until another node solves POW and becomes a new leader. And then a leader can propose a transaction, but the critical difference is that sending transactions, unlike becoming a leader, sending transaction does not require POW. It's a cheap operation. in Bitcoin-NG. So, of course, that leads to much higher throughput and faster transactions. However, transactions require new mechanisms to get secured. So what are the problems? Why is there a problem of securing transactions if we do not secure each individual transaction with POW? In this example, the first leader sent 4 transactions. And then a new leader came up, solved POW, became a new leader, right? And then the new leader decided to disregard T4 from the previous leader and instead included itself. There is nothing, no mechanism that prohibits the new leader from doing that. And now everyone, all other participants are scratching head and trying to understand it. Was T4 part of the previous block? What is T4 part of the new block? And of course, they could have disagreement about that with all the troubles following. So, okay, so why is it an important problem? Because placing the transaction has fees associated with them, right? So in Bitcoin-NG, whoever becomes a leader due to POW also gets a reward. That's the same. But who gets the fees due to transactions? So, like according to the classical approach, the leader gets all the fees. So, if T4 is here, then this leader would get the fee. If T4 is here, then the next leader will get the fee. So the next leader has the incentive to just say, no, T4 is mine. So the idea used in Bitcoin-NG to solve it is to split the fee between the current and the next leaders. So they would both be happy. How do they do it? So the problem is that if the next leader gets the entire fee, then the current leader will not be publishing transactions at all. What's the point? And the main challenge of Bitcoin-NG is how to split the fees. So they've done some extensive analysis, and they showed that there must be at least about 37% fees to the current leader in order to make it profitable for the current leader to publish transactions, and there must be at least 50 plus something percent to the next leader, so that the next leader would not disregard transactions from the previous leader. And so there is a range. And for example, the 40-60% split, so 40 to the current leader and 60 to the next leader works. And that's a nice result, right? So they're both happy. However, okay, so what's the criticism on Bitcoin-NG? So far, this is how the system works. What's the main criticism? The main criticism is security issue with the idea. It's too easy for the leader to send different transactions, to misbehave, to send different transactions, for example, to different system participants and for launch double spending, and so on. So we need some complicated additional mechanism for detecting double spending and punishing a misbehaving leader. So they introduced ideas of like a whistleblower transaction, right? So where someone discovers, oh, the leader is faulty, and adds a whistleblower transaction. Okay, how do we know, whom do we believe, the leader or the whistleblower? There are some complicated mechanisms to this end, but okay, I'm not going to cover. But anyway, this is Obviously, the main problem with Bitcoin-NG is that transactions are not as secure as in Bitcoin. They are faster, throughput increase, lower latency, but less security. Another interesting aspect of Bitcoin-NG is that it introduced a plethora of metrics used in assessing the performance. Like assessing the performance of the conversions of ledgers is not a simple task. Like there is no universal agreement about what metric should be used in that regard. So the Bitcoin-NG took a stab at it and came up with several metrics. So I'm going to talk about 5 different metrics they considered. And again, I'm talking about those metrics because they also have profound effect on metrics used to evaluate later blockchain systems. So first metric, consensus latency, is the time that it takes for a system to converge on a given block. But what does it mean to converge on a given block? So that they actually, like there are several multiple definitions. This is the tricky one. Mining power utilization is the ratio between the mining power that secures the chain and the total mining power. That's an easier one, and it's a security metric. Fairness is the number of blocks produced by a number proportional to the miner's power. So in Bitcoin it is, but if you start playing around with the model and the protocols, it's not always the case. A very important aspect, the reason why crypto puzzles work in Bitcoin for proof of W is the fairness. If I have double the amount of computational power, then in Bitcoin I'll have double the chances to solve a crypto puzzle. But this is very different from majority of protocols. Imagine that I have a non-majority of problems, majority of tasks. Imagine that I have a classical computation and 2 nodes, and one has double the power, second node has double the power of the first node. So, and I need to do some heavy computation for like maybe NP hard, maybe just calculate product of huge matrices, whatever, but deterministic computation. What's the chances of the weaker node to complete the computation before the stronger node? 0. That's a problem. That's not fair, because then we'll end up with complete centralization. All smaller nodes would abandon the system, only the big nodes would remain. So that's one of the important properties of crypto puzzles, that they provide this kind of fairness towards the smaller nodes, and therefore incentivize decentralization. So we need to be careful about fairness and be able to evaluate, and the way to evaluate it is to see if the number of blocks proposed by miners with different powers is proportional to their power. 2 more metrics. Time to win and time to prune. Both metrics are illustrated on this depiction. Time to win is the difference between the time a node appends a block and the last time a different node does not include that block. So here's time to win, right? Is the time between one node appended this block to its local chain and the last moment when someone else thought that this block should not be appended to the chain. So what is winning in this case? Winning means confirming that the block is in and by all the nodes, right? So before, as long as there is a node which thinks otherwise, we are not winning in this terminology. So again, it's the time between the first moment the block ended to the chain. And I need to use the words carefully. Because, okay, what's the cycle, right? First the block is proposed, so the crypto puzzle is solved. And the crypto puzzle is solved, the new leader is selected, okay. So at this point, someone proposes a block, but that's not a victory yet, because maybe there is already a longer branch, right? So only the victory starts only from the moment when someone appends, thinks that this is the winning block and appends it to its local copy. This is when the count starts. And the count ends when everyone thinks it's the winning copy. It's the winning version. Okay, but no, please note that this is just for one instance, for one block. So for each winning block meaning block on the main chain, we can calculate time to win. However, time to win would differ between different blocks on the main chain. So do we take the average? Do we take the maximum? So in this paper, they consider the 90% percentile of the times. But I mean, we could consider average and maximum. Those would also be interesting. Okay, now time to prune. Time to prune is the difference between the time a node learns. So, okay, time to prune is essentially the complement of time to win. It's how long it takes to abandon the block in a way. It's the difference between the time a node learns about a block which later becomes abandoned and the time it abandons the block. So in this illustration, this branch, so this version of block 2 was created before this version. So it went into the chain initially, and it was abandoned only when this block was announced. Because up until this moment, there were two competing branches. Only at this moment, this branch became abandoned. So time to prune, time between someone proposed, time to prune this block would be the time counted from the moment when someone proposed the block, not appended it to the local copy of the chain, and the time when it got abandoned due to the propagation of this block number 4. And again, it's counted on a per block basis. So this is the time to prune this block. And we could ask the same question about each block that has been abandoned. And then we can calculate averages or whatever statistical parameters. So actually they define more metrics, but this just gives you the idea about how we measure the convergence in blockchain systems with branching. Mining power utilization and fairness not related to the convergence, but consensus latency, time to win and time to prune are related to the convergence. So this is what I wanted to say about Bitcoin-NG. They have a few more ideas, but we are trying to focus on the central ideas in the system, and that is even more true about Algorand. So Algorand, again, unlike Bitcoin-NG, which is a paper, Algorand is a real system. And it has about 30 different components, some of which are pretty standard, like the peer-to-peer network. This peer-to-peer network is slightly different compared to Bitcoin, not in an interesting way, so I'm not going to cover it. Instead, I prefer to focus on the elements on the distinguishing elements. the novel ideas in Algorand which affected many later systems. So what are those? The first and foremost was the idea of selecting committee in permissionless system setting. So the system is permissionless. So in permission, when we know the exact people, it's easier to vote and select a committee. When we don't even know, like, how can I select a committee from people whom I do not interact with, whom I do not see, hear, and know about? That's not simple, and this is probably like the main strength of Algorand. And then the consensus is performed only by that committee. So it's also like related to that is one of the first users of proof of stake to select block proposers. So Ethereum adopted proof of stake in 2022. Algorand did it 5 years earlier. And the ideas of Algorand definitely impacted the design of Ethereum. So in Algorand, every node is assigned a weight, and the weight is determined by how much funds you deposit. So that's like the proof of stake. The more funds you deposit, the bigger weight you get. And then the weight affects several factors. It affects your chances to be selected as a committee member in consensus above all. But not only this. Later, when the committee discusses, nodes with a bigger weight in the committee would also have bigger weight in the decision. And the idea of weight is similar. Okay, let's talk for a moment about denial of service attacks. So denial of service attack is when, or in this, okay, let's talk about Sybil attacks, right? So in permissionless settings, the danger is that there is no control over identities. So one entity, one node can say, no, I am 10 different nodes, right? And therefore I should have 10 different votes. How do we prevent that? So in proof of work, it's easy to fake identities, but in proof of work, it's decided by the computational power, and you do not gain anything from splitting your computational power, right? So that's protection against Sybil attacks. In proof of stake, you have a stake, right? So you split your stake, you don't gain anything, right? If you want to replicate yourself 10 times, you need 10 different stakes. There is a difference, however, in the proof of stake in Algorand and proof of stake in many other systems such as Ethereum. In Ethereum, essentially, or in many systems, if you win, then you become. If you win, then you propose a block. That's it. In Algorand, you only get to become a member of the committee, which uses Paxos or BFT, realistically BFT protocols, in order to propose a block. So the committee is using BFT. There is not like the BFT protocol used by the committee is not so interesting in the sense that like it's not novel, right? It's just yet another BFT protocol. But the choice, the selection of the committee is very interesting. So they use cryptographic sortition. They came up with a new cryptographic primitive to elect the committee. And it uses a more general principle of pseudo-random computation. So let's take a look at committee selection. Committee selection is based on verifiable random functions. And that's another cryptographic primitive which we didn't cover in preliminaries, but which plays significant role in blockchains. So what a verifiable random function, how does it work? Every node, let's assume every node has a public-private key pair. So verifiable, given a secret key, a verifiable random function returns a hash and a proof. So it's not possible to create a hash and a proof without knowing the secret key. Okay? However, verifiable random function applies it to any given string input. And then anyone not possessing the secret key, but possessing the public key, so anyone can, given the input string, the public key, the proof, and the hash, can verify that the hash is indeed correct. So you cannot compute the hash, but you can verify its correctness. So this is verifiable random functions, and again, there are many uses in blockchain. So, okay, so how do we select the committee? Every node does the following. First of all, there is a seed which is shared by all nodes. I'm going to talk a bit about how the seed is selected, but for the time being, let's assume that the seed is shared across all nodes, known to everyone, and it's the same seed. It's reliable. So every node can compute, verify a random function using its own key, and apply it on the seed. Then it would compute the fraction of the hash space based on its own weight and the target number of selected nodes. And this way, the node would identify its own interval within the hash the range of the hash values. And then it verifies that the hash produced by the verifiable random function falls within the interval. If it falls within the interval, it declares itself as being part of the committee. So it's probabilistic. It's based on the weight, the interval. The bigger the weight, the bigger the interval. The more, the more the selected nodes, of course, the more the selected nodes, the bigger the interval. Okay? But still it's probabilistic, and yet anyone else can verify the correctness. So if the node claims, yeah, I'm a member of the committee, the other needs to verify that claim. So they verify this claim by verifying, by using the seed, the public key of the claimant, the proof, and the hash value. Now, why is it so important that only that node can produce the hash? Why is it important that no one else would be able to calculate the hash? Because if someone is able to calculate the hash, they would know who is going to be the leader or the member of the committee. And that node becomes a target for attacks. But so because no one gets that knowledge beforehand, the target of the attacks cannot be established beforehand. So it's quite a smart idea. Now, consensus protocol in Algorand is, as I mentioned, very similar to classic BFT protocols. However, committee members with high weights are given priority. There's actually an okay, so how is it done exactly? If suppose I have a weight of 5, then I can actually be selected in the committee 5 times. Okay, okay, so what does every proposal include? So what do we need to agree about as part of the consensus in Algorand? So every proposal obviously includes transactions. I mean the standard fare, right? So we need to agree about the transactions to be included and the order to be included. However, additionally, a proposal would include the seed for the next VRF computation. And itself, it's also computed in a probabilistic way. So the next seed is computed by applying VRF to the last seed using the private key. And of course, the proposal needs to include the proof of the computation, as always, so that everyone else would be able to verify. And if the computation of the next seed is correct, as verified by everyone, then the next seed will now be used by everyone when making next proposals. And when understanding whether the node is a member of the next committee. So a proof of the sortition hash is actually not included with gossip separately. These are probably secondary details. Now, Algorand is an interesting system. Because it's designed like it includes very interesting ideas, the VRF, the sortition, selection of the committees to run the consensus, and so on. However, it also spurred a controversy. It evoked some controversy about what? About why. So one of the main questions about Algorand is how are the participants incentivized to make proposals? In Algorand, there are no fees. So why would the nodes be doing whatever they're supposed to do? Even the good nodes. So the assumption of Algorand is that, again, there is 2/3 of honest nodes, more than 2/3 of honest nodes. And the honest nodes, they are not rational by that assumption. They would be just doing whatever they're supposed to do, regardless of whether they have any gain out of it. So that's a strong assumption. There are other systems with more interesting, maybe more practical assumptions. It's called like the bar model. Bar means Byzantine altruistic rational. There are 3 classes of nodes. Byzantine want to spoil everything. Altruistic follow the protocol regardless of the gain. Rational follow the protocol, but only if it's in their interest. So they're not trying to break the system, but they may deviate from the protocol if it benefits their behavior. So that's a more practical model compared to the one adopted in Algorand. So that was a significant subject of the debate in Algorand. And that concludes the third lecture on Bitcoin-NG in Algorand.